Zach Lavine to the Golden State Warriors. How does that sound? We're going to throw out a possible or proposed trade, and I want you to hear me out. The Warriors have to make big moves. So let's start taking a look at some of the options that are out there. We're going to break it all down now on Locked On Warriors.
You are Locked On Warriors, your daily Golden State Warriors podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Warriors your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Appreciate y'all being here. I am your host, Kylen Mills, a play-by-play broadcaster host with the Big Ten Network, NBC Sports Bay Area, and several others. And I'm very excited to be joined by our Locked On Bulls host, Haize, who is going to break down this maybe crazy, depending on how you look at it, trade proposal. Haize, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate you taking the time.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well, 3 topics to talk about on today's show, and they all revolve around Zach Lavine. I'm going to propose the trade throughout some of the proposals that have been out there floating around on the internet. What would the fit be with Zach Lavine? What are some of the concerns? What are some of the strengths, or what would the upside be? And then, is this realistic? Is this something that could possibly happen? So, Haize, I want to start by talking about Zach Lavine's relationship with the Chicago Bulls, because you look back at the team signing him to this max deal in 2022, and now it seems inevitable. All the reports are coming out that they are looking to trade him this offseason. From your following the team closely, where or what has gone wrong in that relationship and what's transpired with this team to lead to this point?
I mean, what hasn't gone wrong? I think it's all gone wrong in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I think the new front office that we had that came in about 4 years ago, they had to come in and correct some things that the previous regime and Jim Boylen did. And I think they did that for a while. They wanted to make sure that they were able to lock in Zach Lavine, who was up for a contract extension at that time. They got him locked into a max deal. They added DeMar. They added Lonzo. They added Nikola Vucevic. And it was a team that looked like the arrow was pointing up. And then injury happens. Actually, it was a game against you guys. Both Lonzo Ball and Zach Lavine went down with knee injuries in that game, and nothing's been the same since then. And the team has had a worse record year after year, all 3 years since then as well. And I think Zach is a player that is starting to recognize that he's starting to reach the finite portion of his NBA career. And because of that, he wants to win. I also think with that, the Bulls realize, because we're a team that doesn't pay the luxury tax, that realize, hey, we don't have a team that we feel comfortable paying the luxury tax for. And they're willing to now part from Zach Lavine as well, because we're right up against that luxury tax. And I think it's just both. It's like a marriage that both parties realize it's over, but they don't want to be the first ones to say it. And that's where we are now with the Bulls. It's unfortunate. They never really, like Zach Lavine, a lot of people blame just Zach, and I don't buy into that at all. Like, no, Zach's not a perfect player. Maybe he's not a number one, right? Like they built around him. They wanted to see if he's a number one. And he's fine. I think Zach Lavine would be a damn good number 2 or number 3, but they just weren't able to put the team around him that was able to sustain victories. And I also think Zach Lavine has some issues with head coach Billy Donovan, and the Bulls seem like they are in the Billy camp, and they aren't planning on moving on from Billy Donovan anytime soon. So all those things breed a perfect storm where it's just time for the parties to move on.
Yeah, well, something that you did say was music to my ears, or should be to Warriors fans, is that he could be a great number 2. And that's what this team is looking for in the Golden State Warriors, which is why this trade kind of sparked my interest a little bit. Maybe Zach Lavine is a high-risk, high-reward type of player because of the injury history, and he is bringing in a massive contract, at least right now. He still has, I don't remember the exact dollar amount, but, $50 million he's due this upcoming season. But it is possible the Warriors could clear the way and that a trade could come about if the Warriors were interested in someone like Zach Lavine. I know reports just came out this week that the Kings are interested in Lavine, and they've been interested in him for a couple of years. But Lavine specs, first of all, for Warriors fans who are listening: 6'5", 200-pound shooting guard, 6'8.5" wingspan, 29 years old. So under 30 is something I've been begging for the Warriors to just sign anyone who is under 30 years old. Generational athleticism, great slasher, has developed the 3-point shot to where I think he'd be enough of a floor spacer to fit into the Golden State Warriors system. But to me, it's the big contract and the injury history. I know some people look at the win percentage below 40% on his career. Does say to some people this isn't a winner in terms of what kind of player and person he is. So curious for you watching him up close, how big are your concerns about some of those different things in terms of the injuries, and then also like the win percentage? How much do you read into that?
The win percentage, I'll address that first. I don't like he's had terrible teams around him. Like if you look at some of the starting lineups that Zach LaVine has had around him for the first 4 or 5 years in Chicago, they were terrible. You're not going to have a good winning percentage with that. On top of Jim Boylen being the head coach at that time, and he was terrible too. So I don't hold that necessarily against Zach LaVine. He's never been on those type of teams that had quality depth or even the lineup made sense. The injury is the biggest realistic concern for me with Zach LaVine. He had an initial, he had his ACL surgery, and then he didn't have any injuries for real for about 2 or 3 years after that. But then the last 2 or 3 seasons, he's had a major injury every year over the last 3 years, something that's kept him out of games or something that's been lingering on. I know he had the thumb thing, which he ended up playing through, but he needed surgery and he waited on that. So it's always something there with injuries for Zach LaVine. But I also think he's carried a big workload. And if he were to come to like the Warriors, I don't know if that injury bug would be as concerning, considering that he's clearly not the number one he wouldn't be the number one on that team.
Right, exactly. And that's where I think there could be some positives from looking at a possibility of bringing him into the Warriors. Did have to undergo a season-ending foot injury back in February, or surgery rather. So not sure exactly what the recovery process is for that. But looking back over his career, do you think it's possible for him to get back to that 2021 level of play? Because that's what I think is a big question mark. And to remind folks, LaVine was averaging right around 27 a game, incredible shooting splits, like 50, 42, 85. The following season was similar before you mentioned dealing with an up and down road due to injuries, but a 2-time All-Star, dynamic scorer. Do you think he can get back to that level still?
I do. I think that Zach LaVine's still in there. And I think Zach LaVine's flirted with being a 50, 40, 90 player, I think twice over his Bulls tenure. And that player's still there. He's still somebody who, if you ask him to do what he does well and you put him in a system, I think Zach LaVine can thrive if he has to be part of the machine. What we found out is that Zach LaVine can't be the engine of the machine, but he can be part of the machine. He can be a really good part of that machine. So I think he can get back to that player.
Okay, good to know. The other concern, at least I know Warriors fans are going to be concerned about this, is the defensive piece, because the Warriors have not been good defensively since their 2022 title run. It's a big area of concern. A lot of folks are looking at the fact that they were looking at, for example, an Alex Caruso trying to bring in an elite perimeter defender. They need to bring in size. Is it necessarily going to help this team to bring in someone else who's going to be a liability defensively when you already have Steph Curry, who has improved defensively, but certainly is someone that offenses can look to target and attack? He has the athleticism, Zach LaVine does. So that's where sometimes I don't understand the disconnect when you see these players who are so incredibly explosive and so great offensively and then so not even close to that level defensively. How do you explain that from what you've seen?
It's awareness for Zach LaVine. And that's why we saw Zach, I think, play the best defense of his career when he had Lonzo next to him. And that's because Lonzo is a communicator on defense, and he has such great basketball IQ that he communicates out there, and he was able to help kind of overcome some of the IQ issues that Zach LaVine has on that defensive end. Zach LaVine as an on-ball defender has always been solid. If you look at the metrics there, he's always been a solid on-ball defender. It's off-ball, and so if you have a team that communicates defensively, I think it can be good enough. You're always going to have his issues where he gets blown up, especially off-ball, or he falls asleep on some plays. And I think a lot of times, too, with Zach, it's the momentum thing. When Zach feels like he's not getting calls on the offensive side of the ball, he's not giving effort defensively. And that's one of the biggest shortcomings of Zach LaVine that's driven me crazy. But I think if he's coming into a system that has an expectation defensively as well as communicates defensively, I think he'll be good enough. Not ever a lockdown defender, even though like you said, his athleticism and measurables tell you that he should have that ability to be a lockdown defender, but he can be good enough in the team system, I believe.
Yeah, I also wonder with a better system, a different system, maybe a better culture, because it's no secret the Bulls have been trying to figure things out the last couple of years. I wonder if that could also help him bring up the level and overcome some of those inconsistencies that you pointed out. But we'll get more into that here coming up in just a few. The NBA offseason is in full swing, so now is a great time to get outside, take in some baseball, get some fresh air, eat some hot dogs. For example, in the Bay Area, you can go out to beautiful Oracle Park, watch the San Francisco Giants in action. Over in the East Bay, you've got the Oakland Athletics, who are having a better season than last year, so there's a positive. But either way, you can get out and have some fun. And one great way to buy those MLB tickets is by going to the GameTime app. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to the game starting. I was looking up some tickets for Giants Cubs as low as $15. That's right, $15 to go to a game. With killer last minute deals, all in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guaranteed, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. The app has some great features too. You've got flash deals, save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of that game or event you're trying to go to. Zone deals, so you can save more when you choose a section and then let GameTime choose the seats you'll be sitting in. All in pricing, which means you can toggle this feature to show the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. That's always the worst when there's all these extra like administrative fees and processing fees, right? Terms do apply, but download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So the next thing that I wonder about Zach LaVine is a culture fit, a personality fit, pointing out some of the things defensively that he needs to improve on. Would he be better? Does he need a Draymond Green riding him and telling him where to go and really amping him up and making him start to turn the wheels in terms of having that defensive IQ, because that's what Draymond Green is known for. And then also just culture and personality wise, being in a different environment, would that bring out a better side of Zach LaVine? From talking to him and getting to see him up close and personal, like personality wise, competitor wise, what are some of the things that stand out and how do you think he'd fit into a different culture?
I think Zach LaVine is the type of guy who I could see fitting in a different culture really well, especially one that has won and has a coach like Steve Kerr. I think that Steve Kerr believes in his players and he tries to empower his players, and I think that that's something that Zach LaVine would respond really well to. I do worry about the Draymond aspect in the sense that either Zach would be a player that listens to Draymond, or he'll be a player that completely gets under Draymond Green's skin. I don't see any middle ground. It's either going to be one way or the other on those two. Because the pouting sometimes with not getting calls, I think could drive Draymond crazy.
Mm-hmm. And I've seen that a little bit. It looks like you mentioned some of the pouting, some frustration to where he can hang his head. I've seen some criticism of maybe just some of the body language and the posture when Zach LaVine's on the bench. How big of an issue is it? And what have you noticed throughout his career with the Bulls? How bad is it, I guess, is my question.
So the time that we
look at a guy with his numbers and you want a leader, right? Like you don't want the guy who's hanging his head and pouting about calls. You know what I mean?
For sure. And that's the thing. Zach LaVine is not a leader. He's a leader by the fact of like, sometimes he'll go out there and he'll lead on the court. I'm going to make the big shot this game. And even sometimes there have been times where Zach LaVine has kicked it up. We had a game against the Miami Heat a couple of years ago where Zach wanted the call on defending Jimmy Butler, and he did an excellent job. You could tell he just wanted that assignment. And so there's that time. And that's why I think with the right coach, you maybe get that Zach LaVine out there a little bit more. But we had an incident where Zach played terribly. He got benched in the fourth quarter and he pouted. And the players sided with Billy Donovan, not on Zach LaVine. And that, through what we've heard, is a big reason why it kind of, not that it at that moment it became that Zach wanted out, but that became kind of what everything goes back to in the moment that the relationship between Billy Donovan and Zach LaVine just reached the point of no return at that point. So he is somebody who I think he needs to be coached hard. And if he respects you, I think he'll do well. But the Bulls have been losing. We do have a bad coach, so I don't want to put that necessarily on him. We haven't been in the best situation, admittedly, and but there is some of that concern there. And players, like I said, they've sided. They talk about Zach LaVine like in practice. He motivates guys. He believes in his guys. But sometimes when you're in that battle and in that game, whether it's the fiery emotions of the moment or maybe it's even disappointment in himself and his own performance, it doesn't always come out the best way. And that does, when you're somebody who's looked at to be a leader on the team, it really does affect the team negatively when your leading scorer and leader is acting that way. So
Well, to me, that's where him coming to a team like the Golden State Warriors would maybe be a positive, where they already have veteran leaders on the group who I think would hold him to a certain standard versus, for example, a younger Kings team. I know
Yeah.
De'Aaron Fox has really emerged as a leader of that group, but maybe where, you know what I mean? He doesn't have as many vets who are pushing him along and keeping him in line and trying to keep some of that in check. I actually think, like you said, I think the Draymond Green relationship could be interesting. I'd be curious to see how that plays out. But in general, the Warriors do have a solid core that does, take control of those types of situations. They do it with some of the rookies. Jonathan Kuminga's a young player for the Warriors who has had to go through it a little bit in terms of just bench etiquette, the way he carries himself. They've talked about like showing up to things late. Like they have kept him in line, and there are vets on this team who are not afraid, to get into guys a little bit who aren't holding up to the standard that they expect. So I think that could actually be a positive for Zach LaVine. Want to talk a little bit about the fit. I know we mentioned some of the defensive concerns, but offensively as well, because he would be coming in at the 2 spot for a Klay Thompson, who's really been a catch and shoot elite 3-point shooter in this motion offense, has been able to really space the floor. And that's worked well alongside Steph Curry, where I look at some of the highlights of Zach LaVine, and really he's doing a lot by himself, doing a lot off the dribble, off the bounce. Obviously he's a great slasher. And I mentioned the 3-point numbers, really outstanding, as we pointed out, over 40% back in 2021-22. I'm just not really sure if he's that consistent of an outside or perimeter shooter at this point. I know it's something he's worked on in his game, but just kind of curious how you think that fit would look in terms of the Warriors, what they like to do, a lot of screening, a lot of off-ball movement. They've been looking at their 2 guard to be more of a catch and shoot guy, where Zach LaVine is someone who, like I said, his biggest strength to me is the slashing and ability to get to the hoop. But what do you think?
Zach LaVine is actually a really good catch and shoot player. We just don't run that many catch and shoot opportunities for him.
Right. It doesn't happen. Yeah.
Yeah, that I've always, knocked Billy Donovan for myself is that Zach LaVine, for example, last season, small sample size, 45% catch and shoot off catch and shoot opportunities. He's actually a really solid catch and shoot player. And I think because he's had to be the offense a lot of times and the number one, that's why you haven't seen that part of his game be utilized to the best of his ability. But I do think that he's a player that if you're asking him to do catch and shoots, I think he can thrive. The offensive fit is probably the least concern I have if he were to go to Golden State Warriors, honestly.
Okay, interesting. I guess my last one just on the fit before I want to move along to just the realisticness of possibly making a trade with the Warriors and some of the pieces that would have to move is for Zach LaVine. What do you see the longevity being of his career with the injury issues that have popped up? Like, do you think with a 2 role where you mentioned maybe he has less of a workload, less of a burden, he can realistically be a player who goes back to not only the level of 21-22, but is able to sustain it injury free? Because another issue with the Warriors is that they have to look forward and try to figure out what's the next plan beyond even Steph Curry in the next 1 or 2 years. Like, is he realistically a piece that they could bring in and hold on to and could play into his mid to late 30s at a high level?
The injuries that Zach LaVine has had lately have been nagging injuries. Like even the injury that he had last season, the end of season, it was an optional surgery, and I think that may have been a ploy to not go to the Detroit Pistons, which it sounded like he made
before the trade deadline. Yeah,
it was
real coincidental timing on the announcement about the surgery, wasn't it?
Yeah, and then right after it was like a day or so after the Zach LaVine trade, all the pieces that were rumored to be in the Zach LaVine trade went to the different trades. It's like, oh, I see what you did there. I wouldn't want to go to Detroit either. But I think that it's really just been a lot of nagging injuries for Zach LaVine lately. I don't think that he's had anything that you can look at and say this is going to be something that plagues him over his career. Even with the ACL injury, like he's been a better athlete since the initial ACL injury, and then he did have he had to go in and get a scope done and things like that. But from what I've read, that's kind of typical about 3 or 4 years after an ACL surgery that you can expect to get that. So he's always going to probably have some type of nagging injury that probably force him to miss about 10 to 15 games. But anything that's like lingering or long-term or being the same exact injury, I don't think you have to worry about that with Zach. I don't think so.
Okay, because like I said, I just keep going back to the injury issue. And like the Warriors have players who've been injury prone. They've got older players. They're trying to move this organization into the future. And it's like, you hate to bring in another injury prone guy who you really don't think is going to be able to get healthy and sustain, longevity in terms of minutes and being able to stay healthy for bigger portions of games. Jimmy Butler is a player that I talked about on the show. because he's been linked to the Warriors, or just, some of the, again, projected trades that are out there. And it's like, man, do you want to bring a 34-year-old who's been injury prone the last couple of years? Like, is that really what the Warriors need on this team full of guys in their mid 30s and that are already struggling to sustain the minutes and the expectations they have right now? So that's where I kind of look at Zach Lavine. He's under that 30-year-old threshold, but because of the seriousness of the injuries and ACL, now foot surgery, like, what is the realisticness of him being able to sustain a bigger workload and being able to stay healthy? Last question for you is going to be just the realisticness of this trade. I'll put out some of the proposals and exact pieces that were put into a couple of projections that have been out there. So MLB season, WNBA season, still sports going on over the summer. The Olympics coming up right around the corner. So that's going to be a lot of fun. While you're waiting for NBA season to get back in full swing, there is a way you can make watching those games more fun by playing Prize Picks. Put some cheddar on the line. Use your big brain to win some money. With Prize Picks, you can turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a Prize Picks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 players' stats projections, and you're locked in. So, for example, if you're watching the recent NBA Finals, you could pick like Luka Doncic, more or less than 32 points, or you could pick Jason Tatum, more or less than 24 points. So you pick 2 or 6 players, or up to 6. You go more or less on some of their stats. It could also be rebounds, combined stats. In MLB, you're looking at hits, home runs, things like that. And then you put in your bet and you can win money. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the Prize Picks community today. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It is that easy. So going to throw out some of the projected or suggested or whatever trades that have been out there floating around. As you've got the Bleacher Reports of the world, Chat Sports, a couple. So this was actually a trade package Bleacher Report put back in January, so it's not quite as relevant. But the Bulls would receive Chris Paul, Moses Moody, Corey Joseph, who's now off the books, and then 2 second-round picks via Atlanta in 2026 and 2028. Chat Sports just put out a couple weeks ago proposed trade with Trace Jackson Davis, Chris Paul, and Kevon Looney going to the Warriors for Zach Lavine. I think you'd have to include picks in that as well. For the Warriors, I would not like to see them let go of Trace Jackson Davis. This is a team that desperately needs size, and I like the potential he showed this last season. Came in as a really nice piece, averaged 8 points per game out of Indiana, was much more polished than I expected, good in the pick and roll, and I think that he should stick around if at all possible. Something interesting, I actually just read an article about Haize, would love to get your take on, was that Chris Paul actually could be a good addition to the Bulls based on kind of what we talked about and them needing a table setter. I saw it on ESPN just a couple days ago. And kind of curious, do you think that's someone the Bulls would be interested in? We talk about age, he's 40, but they need some stability in the backcourt. Like, do you think that would be even a conversation the Bulls would entertain?
I want to say no, because I'm just not a Chris Paul guy at this stage of his career. But unfortunately, there's too many ties for me for me objectively to say that it may not be something the Bulls explore. Reason being, Chris Paul saw one of his resurging years under Billy Donovan, and he's a close mentor to Kobe White as well. He has ties to the Bulls. And I mean, like I said, I got to be objective. I could see them entertaining that. And I hate myself for having to admit that, if I'm being 100% honest with you. I hate it.
Yeah, well, a lot of Warriors fans had to eat crow as well when Chris Paul came to the Warriors after many weren't his biggest fans either. And that was the reality of the situation. So understood. Realistically, like, what kind of haul do you think the Bulls would be looking for? What do you think the price tag is going to be for Zach Lavine in some of these conversations? We're throwing out pieces like from the Warriors, a Moses Moody, maybe potential 3-and-D guy, Chris Paul. We've talked about the age, things like that. Trace Jackson Davis, Kevon Looney. I'm like, I don't know what they would even use him for, but maybe. But what do you think realistically is what this team is going to be targeting as some of these trade conversations come about?
I think that the Bulls are looking for a couple of different things. They're looking at salary cap relief. I think it is unfortunately a big motivating part in this. And then I think on top of that, they do want some type of young player that has some upside. And so Jackson Davis is somebody I love. I love when your guys' roster. Like, I'm not even gonna lie to you. I love him. Moses Moody I like a lot too. And I think when you look when you look at the Bulls, They need some defense. They need 3-point shooting. Those are two players that could definitely help in that aspect. So those are two that I personally really like, and I do think that those are players that could get that conversation started as well with the Bulls. But some type of draft compensation would have to be in there as well.
Yeah, for sure. A big picture, just though, in shopping Zach LaVine around, I know the Sacramento Kings have been tossed out there, and that move would make sense depending on what happens with Malik Monk. Like, what in general are the Bulls looking for? Like, are they wanting more draft capital? Is this a team that is accepting they're in full rebuild? Are they wanting pieces that are going to be helpful, or, more win now, or whatever you want to call it? Are they looking for any certain, position, or you mentioned defense, just big picture, kind of like what are some of the key needs for this team, or what do you think this front office is going to be looking for?
Unfortunately, I don't even know if our front office has rebuild in their dictionary. I think they just blacked that part out in the dictionary.
But why not? I don't get it.
I don't get it either. But I think this is a team that is looking. Draft compensation is something that I do think that they want. And I think overarchingly is that they want some players that can contribute now, because in their mind, they're still in win now mode. Why? I have no idea. Your guess is as good as mine, but this is a team that is still, until they show me otherwise, everything that they've communicated, everything that they've done, they operate like a team that went to the second round of the playoffs, and they just feel they just need a little bit to get them over the top. That's how they operate. So as long as that's what they're showing me, that's the focus here for the Chicago Bulls, I guess to say.
That's funny because Warriors fans, it'll sound a little bit familiar, at least for some folks who feel like it has been or it is time for this team to move on from the core and the roster as they've had it constructed. They feel like there needs to be more major change, but the front office, has been indicating, at least to this point, with, for example, last trade deadline, like people were looking for a big move, didn't happen. They feel like, hey, we're not close to just being over the hump. Like, we're a team that's 500 throughout the last 2 regular seasons. Like, big changes need to happen, but the Bulls are way worse off. I don't understand where the win now is still the idea. Like you said, even like a soft rebuild, I feel like something more needs to happen than just like, we are right there. Like, you watch this team all season. So I mean, maybe you can
every single game, unfortunately,
indicating that they're right there.
Everything this year after the trade deadline, when we made no trades yet again, our president of basketball operations, you would have thought that he was out there like, yeah, we're competitive. We feel we're competing for what? Like like, what are we doing here? Like, it's I don't know. It's something in the water in the United Center, and I'm glad that I'm not drinking it, because it's the delusion is real with the Chicago Bulls right now.
Oh, geez. Well, the positive for Dubs fans is that all reports have indicated, and even Mike Dunleavy, the GM, has said at the end of the season, they're open to making big moves. They're open to making major changes. What those might look like, how that might come about, still remains to be seen. But at least they're open to some big changes happening. And now it looks like one of those big changes could possibly be Klay Thompson moving on. And, maybe that does really usher in a new era of Warriors basketball. Remains to be seen. But Haize, thanks so much for coming on. Really appreciate the time. Where can folks follow you? Where is the best way for them to keep up with your content as we continue to watch the trade scene develop, and just in general, follow your great NBA content you continue to roll out?
Thank you. You guys can follow me at CEO Haize. You can also follow us at Locked On Bulls. We deliver the best daily Bulls content you'll find out there. That's for sure.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Well, Locked On also has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of the Locked On Podcast Network, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Again, Haize, thanks so much. It's been fun. Who knows? Zach LaVine to the Warriors. Maybe we'll see it happen. Maybe not, but it's fun to talk about something in the meantime while we wait for the true chaos of free agency to unfold. But thanks again for hanging, everybody. Have a great day. Have a great night wherever you are listening from. We'll see you next time.